Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. It's Sonia. Just to reiterate that I have done in previous videos, I'm one that has to write things out. Otherwise, you're really not gonna get much of what I actually wanted to say. That's just what I've always been a writer. I've always been a note taker. Even in high school, when everyone else is just, sitting there listening and forgetting everything, I wrote down stuff. Probably too much stuff, but I wrote it down. I take notes out of books. I take notes off of Pinterest. I take notes off of everything. I have notes everywhere. I have notebooks everywhere. Okay, that's just how I am. But it's easier for me to take notes and and then put everything all together, and usually these end up in my grimoire or a notebook journal or something because I want to keep them. But that's me, okay? I'm not reading somebody else's stuff. I'm not, none of that. This is just me. This is how I do it. I'm not ones that have notes sticking up here or whatever, or they're on their phone and their computer's over here with their typed out stuff and they look over here. You see them doing it, or all of that kind of stuff. I don't do that. Or they stop and start, like they'll memorize a whole bunch and then start the camera back. Stop. I don't do that either. I actually don't even like watching that. So that's me. Hi, how you doing? Today I wanted to talk about sort of like generational tensions in contemporary witchcraft. This is like a personal perspective, okay? This is things that I've noticed maybe over the past 5 or so years. I've made note of it. Yeah, so it's my personal perspective on, tensions. Not serious things, didn't know another word for it. But to me, contemporary witchcraft contains a noticeable tension between the older practitioners and the younger witches. And this divide is not strictly about age. Most of the time it doesn't have anything to do with age. It comes from a place of the differing experiences. Your sources of learning and your expectations of what you think the craft should be. Now, these differences can create that friction between those who learn witchcraft through the limited, often fragmented resources, like me, and those who enter the craft through this expansive, fast-moving world of digital information that's all in your face, okay? And there's a difference. Now, some older practitioners just fall right in line, with this digital information. They love it. They soak it all up. They want to be a part of it. There are some who don't. I can take it or leave it. I really don't want to get caught up in the digital information. I pick and choose, and then some things I'm like, yeah, meh. Okay. I'd rather grab a book and get something deeper, and that's just me. Because my own introduction to witchcraft came through whatever books that I happened to find at a library. And being in a southern small community, you can't always find the same books that a larger city library would have, okay? And then I had contact with this Wiccan-based group, small group. Now, these early sources that I'm speaking of, they were very inconsistent. They were eclectic, of course, and often disconnected from any kind of historical or traditional context, such as the group. I don't think any of the books I got were any kind of historical thing either, and certainly not traditional. And now that I'm older, I found myself wanting more depth than even those early materials offered me, and I have begun seeking traditional perspectives. I've said this, historical grounding, and practices rooted in older cosmologies. And even some older ones will say, why are you bothering with historical things that has nothing to do with today? For me, it has everything to do with today, because without that historical things, I wouldn't be here doing this. I wouldn't be here talking about this. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing over there on that working altar, because I wouldn't have been interested. And it wouldn't have been known about, because without the historical, it's just a bunch of made up crap that we did for modern contemporary stuff. Okay, I just don't see how it could exist without historical value to back it up. Now this shift has made me more aware of how much context has been lost in modern approaches to the craft, especially those shaped primarily by the social media or the surface level trends. Older witches often express concern that contemporary witchcraft has become aesthetic driven. We've heard this. And detached from the land-based, spirit-rooted practices that once defined it. I've heard that a lot. More along the aesthetic-based than land-rooted, because I really don't feel like I come across a whole lot of people that talk about the land-rooted. Their experience tends to come from direct experimentation, mentorship. There was a lot of mentoring going on way back, okay? Or folk traditions that emphasize relationship, responsibility, and consequence. And for them, witchcraft is a craft with structure and depth, not simply a spiritual identity. There's a lot of just spiritual identity going on right now, my perspective. They're wary that modern approaches flatten the complexity of the craft, which means make it not, it's not important. It doesn't hold substance. It removes its historical grounding and treats it as a collection of interchangeable techniques rather than a coherent worldview. Younger witches frequently enter the craft through these online spaces where information is abundant, but it can be very uneven. Their practices emphasize accessibility, personal expression, and adaptability, and many value the freedom to create their own systems and resist what they perceive as gatekeeping from older practitioners. And from their perspective, tradition can feel restrictive or outdated, and the emphasis on historical accuracy can seem like an attempt to control who is allowed to participate. This generational tension shows itself clearly. Like, I have been at festivals and gatherings. The younger generation, they can be upsetting, but they also can be very delightful for some older witches. Some that may be past having the ability to express themselves at these festivals and stuff. And so, some elders dislike the ecstatic rituals, the loudness and the break from familiar forms. And however, there are those elders, like I just spoke of, they're delighted to see these young people holding these rituals at all, or even hosting any, especially when those rituals include practices that they have not seen in decades, and they're like, it just makes them smile. And for them, the creativity and enthusiasm of younger witches are signs that the craft is still alive and it is capable of growth. Even among the elders, we can find no single viewpoint. Some will believe rituals should be done the same way every time, preserving the consistency and lineage. I've been there. I've witnessed that. Others argue that while it is important to learn like basic set rituals for things, because you never know what's going to come up. Whoever was supposed to lead the ritual or whatever, you got to, they didn't show up. Okay, so, what do I do? Well, you use your basic one. And then maybe if you can add in a few other things, not to make it, blah. Those tried and true techniques. Rituals should not become so repetitive that it loses its spiritual spark. It can keep that baseline basic, but then add in things, to, keep it interesting. Tradition should support connection, not smother it. The broader truth is that traditions need to be preserved, but they also need to evolve. Without new practices, new interpretations, and new forms of expression, the craft could risk becoming stagnant. But without roots, it could risk becoming hollow. The craft can survive by balancing continuity with change. There's also a pattern where new traditions, beliefs, and practices will emerge with great enthusiasm. They'll spread rapidly, and then they become overdone. As they circulate widely, they often lose nuance, become diluted, or drift far from their original context. That's sort of like where you get the complaints now about the cinnamon blowing into your house. You get both sides of that. And then with both sides of arguments, it gets a little, yeah, I'm over it. Do it if you want to, or don't. Just whatever. Eventually, many of these trends will fade, become outdated, or just forgotten when another one comes along. This cycle contributes to the frustration felt by older practitioners who see this depth replaced by this novelty, and by younger practitioners who feel pressured to keep up with the ever-shifting expectations. I have a daughter who's just into practicing. She's not fluent at it or anything like that. And sometimes it can take all I can do, not to dissuade what she's interested in. She will find something on TikTok or something, and she's talking about it, and she's interested in it, and she wants to do it. She has to take her own path, okay? It's not my business to veer her off that path. That's her learning. Okay, she has to learn, and she will, but you can't intervene and tell them that's not a thing. No, you gotta let them do what they're gonna do, okay? It's their path. They will learn. And maybe it's what they're wanting to do helps them. Maybe it's a good thing. It's none of your business, even if it is your daughter. So I can see both sides of this tension, okay? You got the younger practitioners benefiting from unprecedented access to information, it's everywhere. And this creativity they have from it brings new life to the craft. I'm happy to see it. At the same time, I believe, and I say this to her, that research into history, into older texts, although she's not a big reader, and diverse cultural practices is essential, because without the context, the craft can become shallow and disconnected from the very forces that once gave it meaning. Older books, regional folklore, and cross-cultural study provide a foundation that can help practitioners at least understand why certain techniques exist, how they developed, and what worldview they originally belonged to. This grounding does not limit creativity. It can only enrich it. Like reading and studying about voodoo, hoodoo, or all of these other ones that they say, oh, that's closed practices stuff. That does not stop you from learning about it, appreciating it, knowing where it came from, why it came to, and how to relate to someone when you come in contact with them. That's not wrong to do. Ultimately, the conflict reflects the changing landscape of how witchcraft is learned. What was once transmitted through limited books, personal experimentation, or small groups is now shaped by this global digital networks. My own journey mirrors the broader shift. It has made me appreciate the value of both accessibility and depth, while also recognizing that the craft needs its roots if it is to remain meaningful. So until next video, I'll see you then.